It is my privilege to reintroduce Antoinette Martin to cover what we've been covering this mini series. It's been a fun time, and we've covered everything from counterintelligence in the job hunt, emotional intelligence, and interviewing and power selling last week. And so, Antoinette, she has some questions for you. Oh, you're muted. I can read body language a little bit.
Thank you. So Steve and I talked about, do we go into a segment on negotiating your worth? Or do we give an opportunity to go over the three things that we've already talked about and do a brief recap and also answer some questions, right? You may be saying, yeah, this is great in theory, but I'm really struggling with how to apply it in real life. And so we talked about doing a quick overview segment, and then if we had time and you wanted to, going on into that negotiation. But what I'd like to start out with is just to get maybe three things, and you can throw them in the chat, you can shout them out. Three things that maybe stuck with you or that was new to your way of thinking about your job search that came out of our discussions over the last 3 weeks, because we had some great ideas shared by job team members. And I want to get a feel for what really resonated and what do you maybe need to continue discussing after this little mini series.
Hey, Oliver.
So real quick, I did a phone interview with a company that is located here in Wyoming, and got the chance to actually use my 30-second pitch that I had not even really heard of before the group, and definitely not made any progress on until last week's meeting. And I mean, I don't know. They set me up for the next set of interviews, so I guess it didn't go terrible. So that
Yay!
was I really appreciated that each week when we kind of had different people. The first one reading the job descriptions, the second one going through accelerators, and the third one working on those 30-second pitches. For me, it's been very useful to kind of see the nuts and bolts of putting together that process, not only my own, but everyone else's. I've really appreciated that.
Thank you, Oliver. That's good feedback. Okay, two other quick insights from the last couple of weeks.
Uh, I really liked the week when going through the job descriptions and
Mhm.
sort of dissecting those and reading them with a critical eye to what they are really looking for, especially because we looked at a couple that were really wide ranging, which are a lot of what I see.
Mhm.
And so being able to sort of like hone that skill of dialing in on what matters out of the 50 things that they swear matter, what actually does matter, that was super valuable to me.
And Dax, just as a quick question, as you did your interviewing, did your candidates use any of the skills that you've learned? And would it have been a better experience for you as an interviewer if they had?
Um, they Yes. So, and actually, in different aspects, like there was one that I thought on paper was going to be fantastic and did not like have any interview skills. That person hadn't looked at like the website. They hadn't followed up. Like they hadn't. I could tell they hadn't really like read other than on the surface level the job description. Whereas somebody else did, and she came to the table with ideas based on that, and the other did as well. And those were our two top choices that I'm thinking of. They came to the table with things that were in the job description, and like spoke directly to their experience with those things, especially like in answering questions and stuff. And the one other thing that the person who actually got the job that she did, that was like, me and my friend afterward agreed that like this was a standout moment for her, was she said she didn't know when we asked her a question, and that she didn't have experience with a particular thing. But then she like moved that, and and sort of like said like, but here's how I would like learn that, or here's what I would do. But she didn't try to like create an answer where she had none.
That integrity, it just creates a whole new level of experience, right? For both the interviewer and the interviewee, right? And I don't know about you guys, but I grew up in the era of, well, never don't have an answer, right? And I don't think that served anyone really well, right? And being able to be your authentic self and say, I don't know, but these are questions I would have. This is what I would do. So powerful. All right. Thank you, Dax. All right. And I do have, don't tune out. I promise they're not horrifically boring. I have slides just to orient people who have not been through the last couple of weeks, so that we can go through the summaries and you don't get lost. And then also, for those of you who are just joining now, Steve does have recordings of all of the previous sessions where you can go back and watch them, or say, well, I don't have time, give me the 30-second recap or whatever. So I'm going to start sharing, and then we will go through them in order. There we go. Okay, we will go to presentation mode. Woohoo! All right, so introductory slide, no one cares. Okay, so the first one, as Dax mentioned, we went through taking a look at job description, and we called it job description counterintelligence, screening for a match. Like, is this even what I want? And can I do it? And is it going to kill my soul, or will it be an okay job? And then looking for red flags and questions. And I love this quote by Dennis Waitley that says, our problems result not only from a lack of action, but from action without thought. So if you just scan your job description and you're like, whoo, okay, fine, whatever, apply, move on. As Dax kind of illustrated with his real world example, that doesn't always serve you, doesn't always serve the interviewer or the company you're applying for. So what are we looking for? You're looking for the warnings and the invitations, right? So the warnings and the red flags. Look for the chaos and the trouble words. Anyone who uses fast-paced environment, along with multitasking, along with responsible for, and a list of 30, 40 things, you have some really important questions that you need to ask this company, or at least the HR department, before you apply. Because typically what that means is they're going to throw everything at you and expect you to swim and deliver on 10 deliverables while you're also preparing to take on 5 extra projects, right? And they may not know what they really want. So, and then you also are going to look for the ambiguity. Do they say one thing in their snazzy introduction, but then that thing is not backed up in the responsibilities or requirements? Or do you see a different story when you look at their Glassdoor or even their corporate website? Are there things that give you pause when you said, oh, but you said this, but when you've said that, right? And then you're also looking for the contradictions. So exactly that, or the nebulosity. I love that word, and it's a real word, right? Where they throw a whole bunch of buzzwords at something, but they don't say anything, right? And then you're looking for realistic versus unrealistic expectations. So if they throw a whole bunch of systems at you or a whole bunch of certifications and requirements, and they want someone with 5 years experience, but the certifications take forever to get, then they may not really understand what it takes to do this job well. And Nee, you have your hand raised.
Hi everyone. So I have a quick question. So sometimes when you see some job postings, with the job descriptions and then the qualifications, etc., that they require for the job, sometimes it's very scanty. Because I've seen certain job postings that have maybe like just two bullets, if I should put it that way, for both job description and then maybe the qualification. So in this case, like, what would you do as a candidate, also for that particular role? What would you advise to do um, based on like trying to find the red flags? What would you advise? Is it glass door, like you mentioned? How are you going to find out,
Yeah,
before you make a move?
it's an excellent question, right? The opposite end of the spectrum. I would first look at their corporate website or at their Glassdoor, and if there's nothing there, then it's probably a scam posting, right? And if there are things there, but that job description is still really small, then I would look on LinkedIn and see if I could find anyone who has a similar title that works in the company or has worked in the company in the past and reach out to them and say, hey, tell me about this organization. Tell me about this job. What makes it successful? And I would also reach out to, because there's usually always a contact or at least a website or a phone number, and say, hey, I have a few questions. I'd love to walk through this job with you. And then you're going to ask those critical questions like, what's your desired outcome in filling this job? What do you really need them to accomplish? Or you ask, what are the three most critical things that this role needs to deliver in the first 6 months? Or tell me about someone who has successfully done this role in the past. And what did that look like? What skills did they bring? How did they manage the role? Right? And if it's, well, they did their job, then walk away, right? Oliver, you have your hand raised.
So just very quickly, I don't know if you remember, we went through a job description that I had, and
Yeah.
it had a lot of exactly these things that you were talking about: trouble words, ambiguity, and the description just went on and on and on. It turns out that the company was creating a new position, a new mid-level supervisor position, and really didn't know what they want. And as I was talking with them, that specific question that you mentioned, what are the deliverables you're looking for in the next 3 months, was very useful in talking to them about kind of describing what it is they want from this job. So just real world experience, that worked extremely well. Thank you.
You're welcome. And as Oliver points out, I'm not saying that when you see these red flags or these warnings that you run away, right? What I am saying is that you put thought into how you proceed, right? These are things that empower you to take charge of your job search. So, is this interesting enough to me to pursue? What do I need to know as I move forward? Okay. Any other questions or comments about that?
I love your comment about those type of tailored questions at the end. My mind is thinking about, what questions, I try to come up with appropriate questions for the recruiter. For instance, like I have a phone screening just at the top of the hour, but like I want questions to her because, him or her, this individual she wants to identify for me if I'm a fit for the role and I'm a cultural fit. But I love those because a lot of times these recruiters may not know the answers to those type of questions. So like, I don't want to lose, but I love the type of questions you're asking because I'm just making note of those. Those are great questions to ask like a hiring manager. Because when I had a second interview last week with the hiring manager, I wanted to ask them what would success look like if we looked back in 120 days if I was hired. Because I wanted him to think that Jared is hired for this role, and then a little manipulation of the mind. But then with that question you added, that's a great one to, the person had this role previously, but in this position, they're creating it. But I did ask him, so in the creation that you're building this new team, what would success look like? And he's like, well, this and this. And then, okay, well, where have you done? My mind, I'm trying to do better at this, is follow-up questions. Is they ask me a question, I want to ask them a follow-up question. What are your thoughts on that? Because I've been reading on that and I was advised to do that, is if they ask you a question and you answer, and then throw back a question to them. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, so Jared, you bring up so many good things. So let me call out a difference that I do think we need to talk about, and then I will specifically answer your question.
No, please. I really appreciate your time. So thank you for helping us.
So when we think about a lot of these questions, to Jared's point, a lot of them are relevant to the hiring manager, maybe not the poor recruiter who's just trying to get through 40 calls today and do a recap report to all of her executive teams that she's got to report back to, right? So we want to give them some grace. But it's important to have those different questions. So and for any conversation that you're going to have, I always love kind of setting the stage at the beginning. Thank you so much for your time. I realize your calendar is probably booked in triplicate. I do have a few questions for you. Would you prefer that I ask them as we go through the interview, or shall we save about 5 to 7 minutes at the end to make sure that we go through those? Because you want to set the stage that you're not just going to answer their questions. You're giving them the gift of your time because you have questions as well. And your time needs to be honored as much as their time needs to be honored. Okay. So that's one thing that I like to do regardless of who I'm having a conversation with. And then to Jared's question about the follow-ups, I do like that. There are certain formats, and I know especially with roles for the state of Washington, their format does not allow that, right? They tell you at the start, we've got 12 questions to go through. Everyone will rotate through a different question. You are to answer those questions, right? But you can still work it in, right? You could answer part of their question and then say, I'd love to tell you specifically how I handled XYZ situation, and then give them an answer. Or, Jared, you can turn it around and answer that question, and then you could say, I can tell this matters to you. What experiences have you had as a manager with people who did this well? Tell me about them. Or if they go like, you would say, okay, maybe someone didn't do it well. Tell me about that. Or you can say, this is one of your top priorities. These are one of the things that you've listed as critical for success. What are you worried about? What are you worried might go wrong? Because then that's an opening for you to be thinking about, oh, that's heavy. I don't know if I want to play that game. Or you can be thinking about, whoa, easy peasy. I've done that like 5 times over, and I can think of 3 different success stories. And then you can validate that concern by saying, that's a really good concern. I've come across that in my career thus far. Here's how I handled it. Would that work well with your management style? Right? So you're looking for that back and forth. It's kind of like dating, right? The most boring dates you've ever been on are the ones where like, what kind of flavor ice cream do you like? Vanilla. right? And then that's where it goes. What you're looking for are questions like, tell me about the best ice cream that you've ever had and why. What experience did it create for you? What memory did it create? Right? So you're looking to give a broader, you're looking to pull them in, kind of like Oliver mentioned with the 30-second commercial or 30-second pitch at the beginning, right? You're looking to pull them in and engage them in a deeper conversation. You want them to give you more time. Jared, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you. Because when they, tell me about yourself or tell me how you use this program or platform, I've been trying to remember, and I don't do it all the time, but I'll respond. And then what I want to say is, well, how is the company currently using it now? What have been some of the pain points? I'm happy to answer that question. And I answer, then I want to flip it back and say, I also like to say, well, have I answered that question? Are you hoping, like, did I answer that question? Do you have any other follow-up questions? Because I don't want them to feel like I didn't answer it. But then I play with that one. Like, no, that was great. I think you answered it. And then they go to the next question. But I want to squeeze in maybe a pivot and say, hey, how are you currently using this now? What have been some of the pain points as we look at end of Q1? How's the growth so far? Like, so I want to try to control it, but I want to guide it where I can so I can make sure I'm hitting all the points. But I think you did great. And I love that AI is transcribing this so I can look at it afterwards. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Those are great questions. I would caution you not to frequently use the follow-up of, did that answer your question? I did that in an interview one time, and I had the recruiter, who, bless her soul, she's like, I want to give you feedback because you were one of the top 3 finalists, and I want you to understand kind of the dynamic of this company and the team that you were applying for. That never happens, right? So I'm like, I will give you all the time in the world. I'll even buy you coffee, right? And she said that my asking if that had answered their question was seen as a waste of time, that they would have told me if my response didn't answer the question. So I still think it's a good one to ask, but be judicious in how you use it, right? And another question that you could throw in from a system standpoint is, to your point, how long have you been using that system? And are you looking to migrate to a different system within the next 2 to 5 years? Right? Because then that tells you a little bit more about the company. And it shows a more strategic mindset, right? That you're not just going to do the job, but that you're open to change. All right, good questions. Any other questions before we move on to the invitations? Yeah, go ahead, Carrie.
I can't get my hand raised. I don't know what's going on, but sorry. I like to ask them too, like what their leadership style is as a leader. I've thrown a couple off actually, like they've never been asked that before. Because I want to see if I mean I've worked for all kinds of course. I want to know if my style matches with them or if it doesn't, how to navigate that differently if need be in the future, or what they're going to be like. My manager, which is like the same, or, do they let you have more creativity? So I always like to ask what type of leadership style they have.
Right. That's a really critical question to ask. And as we go into the emotional EQ section, we'll identify different ways, or we'll recap different ways that we can get at that information in addition to just asking them right off the bat, right? But excellent question to ask. Okay. And in addition to on your job descriptions, look for the invitations, right? I'm not here to be a Debbie Downer on your job search, right? Look for what resonates. If you see a description of their culture that absolutely resonates with your soul and you're like, I want to work there and retire there. Or if you see consistency between the job site, the job description, the company website, what's coming on Glassdoor, what their people post on LinkedIn, that's a good sign, right? You're looking for what resonates. and you're looking for consistency. And then look for opportunities to shine, to Jared's point, right? Yes, I've done this. And then think about the top 3 examples that prove that you're expert at that. Okay. And then you're also going to build your interview list, all right? So we've already talked a little bit about these. Tell me about working in. What does it mean to describe someone who did X well? It seems like you've seen this role done poorly or well. What does done well or poorly look like, right? Because you want them to engage in a narrative. You want to hear the story because that's what they're looking for from you. They want to know, did you do it? And how did you do it? And you want to know, do they really have a clue about what they're looking for? And what is it going to be like to work in this environment? To Jared's point again, your questions might be different if you're only talking with the recruiter at the beginning, right? So your questions for the recruiter can be, is this the first time this position has been posted? Tell me about the creation of the job description process. Because you're looking for, did they struggle with it? Was it easy? Did they know what they wanted to do? As you've interviewed candidates, what are things you might want to change about the job description so that you get better candidates in? Right? That's a legitimate question to ask because often we'll put a job description out. I remember one time we did, and it had everything we wanted, but the title did not resonate. And we were getting 0 candidates. And I'm like, but this is what the person's going to do. And the feedback from HR was, you've got to change it to something lame or we're not going to get any candidates. And so we did, and we got candidates and we hired the right person. So there are things that the recruiter can tell you about the nuts and bolts of the process that they probably are pretty interested in talking to someone about because no one really asks them questions other than, am I a good candidate? When are you going to hire me? And what's the pay? Right? So make their job interesting. Ask them some relevant questions. All right. Any questions before we move on to the emotional EQ? This is a lot to throw at you guys, especially you guys who are joining for the first time. Okay. And as always, please remember, you have the theory and the hard part is the practice, right? So as you come up against these things, as you're working with them, ask each other, ask Steve, ask me, just make sure that you're getting the theory and that you're testing it and you're applying it. Okay, interviewing EQ. We talked about using the BAR method to screen out human and cultural barriers. And Carrie, this goes back to your question, right? To asking them, what are they like as a manager, right? And the BAR method talks about the boundaries. This is all about you, okay? The boundaries that you have that are critical for you to function in an environment. And then the accelerators. So what things present in a job just set you on fire, put you in your zone that you absolutely love and that you could do forever and a day, even working a 24-hour day and not notice, right? Unrealistic, but that's an example, right? And then what are the returns? If your boundaries and your accelerators are met, then what are you able to deliver for the company, right? So for me, a quick summary statement, you don't have to have a summary statement, right? But for me, when I work in a company that values integrity and authenticity, and I'm able to connect with people, truly, authentically, deeply connect with people and solve problems that benefit the company and their customers, I return phenomenal results. I build significant teams who have crucial conversations and deliver exceptional results. And I'm able to build bridges with clients and customers and create cohesion, right? So just a very simple thing. When my boundary, because I have to have authenticity and integrity, is coupled with what I absolutely need, connecting with humans and solving problems, this is what I'm able to deliver. Okay, and this quote is from Greg McKeon. If you don't set boundaries, there won't be any, or there will be boundaries, but they will be set by default or by someone else instead of by design, instead of by you. Okay, so using this method, and there's a worksheet for those of you who are new. It's really easy. I do highly recommend that you bounce it off someone who knows you well, a best friend, a significant other, a coworker who has seen you in good times and bad, so that you get a balanced picture, right? You're going to identify your boundaries. What do you absolutely have to have in order to function? And then you're going to capture your accelerators. And then you're going to prioritize them. And then you're going to create your interview questions. Okay. And I highly recommend situational questions where you're asking them to tell the story. Tell me about, describe the most recent time when, right? And you're looking at the job description, and you're also looking at the questions that they have asked you, right? So if the job description says something like able to multitask in a fast-paced environment with constantly changing priorities, legit, you guys have seen those, right? Then you're going to ask a question. Tell me about the most recent time where your team successfully navigated those multitasking, fast-paced, constantly changing priorities. Tell me about when they did that well. What did that look like? Or you can ask the opposite. Tell me about a time when your team struggled with that. What did that look like? How did you guys change your approach so that you could better succeed the next time? Okay? And again, these questions will come as you critically evaluate the job description and as you work through this bar method where you understand what matters to you the most. I want to know if an executive can pivot, if they can say, well, I think we epically failed right there, and I think that was hard on all of us. Let's talk about how to do it differently, because I don't want my team going through that again. Okay. Another question to ask is, how frequently do you experience? And Oliver, I thought about this one a lot with some of your work history experiences and some of the job descriptions that we worked through, right? How frequently do you find the lab managers at odds with the engineers as we're trying to deliver a product for the client? It's okay to ask those questions. And to Carrie's point, watch them squirm a little bit or be uncomfortable, because you're also evaluating the manager, the culture, the team, and what they really are asking you to deliver. This is your opportunity to ask those hard questions so that you know what you're getting into as much as you possibly can from just a few minutes in an interview and candidate process. You can go ahead.
Sorry, interject real quick. I also really liked the follow-up question we had of what would your team think of what you said? That was very interesting to me to walk through that, like I say, with this phone interview that I had.
Right. And for those who are new, when we were talking with Oliver specifically about kind of the tensions that happen between lab managers and the engineers in delivering a product and how to solve things, we came up with a follow-up question of the manager may say one thing, and if it doesn't resonate with you, or even if it does, a follow-up question is, what would your team say? Did they have the same experience? Or would they say something different? So excellent follow-up, Oliver. Thank you for bringing that up again. You can ask them to describe their most successful or least successful time. See how comfortable they are about talking about failure and see where they give credit when talking about success. And then you can ask them, how does your team live this value or that value? Or you can even say, how does your team live outside of the workday? Does the manager know? Do they take an interest in the lives of their team members outside of work? Does that matter to you? If it doesn't, don't ask the question. But if it does matter, then identify questions that you want to ask that get them to tell the story around how they support work-life balance. And then another fun question, Carrie, that kind of just like no one's ever asked me that before, right? Is you can ask them what went right or what went wrong last week or this week. And what contributed to that? And then Jared, to your point about follow-up questions, you can ask them, how are you going to change, or are you going to change what your team does or what you do as a manager to make sure that those right things keep happening or to make sure that those wrong things stop happening? All right, that is a lot to throw at you guys. So I'm going to stop sharing just for a minute and let's go back to our Hollywood squares. Any questions? Well, I tried that, but it epically failed or backfired, or Dax, I said that for you, right? Anything you want to poke at or delve more into before we switch to that next part?
I was laughing because I have had something that I think is foundationally important, but it has backfired on me twice when I've asked it, which in a way could be like an indicator that those two companies weren't at a mature enough level to do their marketing in a way that I would have failed regardless. But my question is very similar to that last question is, what is working in your marketing right now? Because I feel like, if I'm coming in and these were like first hires, like marketing directors, like no one had been doing marketing before, and my thing is going to be build on what's already working, solidify that foundation, and then start solving problems. But a lot of companies, a lot of CEOs, and they're hiring because they have problems to solve, and they're not thinking. They're thinking, who's going to come in and like change things to fix what's broken? And I'm like, well, let's triage first, keep things right, going well, and then we'll fix what's broken. So that's where it's backfired for me, is that like just thinking at the wrong point along the trajectory of where they're thinking.
Yeah. But to your
I don't know
point,
if there's a question there, but that's why I was laughing.
I think that's a great example, Dax, and I think you may have had your answer at the beginning when you said, I don't know if that was, if it told me what I needed to know and I didn't want to be in that mess, right? Because if they can't articulate that, then they're probably going to expect you to work miracles, but not give you the tools to work the miracles, right? It'd be like the conjurer in The Princess Bride, right? Bring him back to life. So, okay, so that's a great example, a very good example. Okay, any other questions around any of that so far? Again, this is a lot to throw at you, so questions are great.
I heard this question, I've been using it, but sometimes I get really gray responses, meaning I usually say near the end is after asking some question, and I say, well, based on our conversation so far, I'm very excited for this opportunity. So I kind of pitch it like, hey, I'm excited based on everything that I've said in our conversation today. Would anything to give you pause on moving me to the next step, and what does next steps look like? So I love that question when I was coached on it. But then sometimes, so they're, in honor of failing, sometimes they say, well, we're at the beginning stages right here, and you're 3 of 15. So I've gotten that. Or you're actually number 1, and we're going through about 20 folks in round 2. So either it's benefited me, or I've been able to identify, hey, well, you're lacking this skill in this sector. You don't have this, because I'm in marketing with DAX. But I like that question, because either it'll tell me how things are going, but also too, sometimes they just don't know, they say, or the recruiter will say, well, I'm typing up all the notes and I'm presenting it to the hiring manager, and he or she is going to review, they identify, I would say the gender there. But my point is, I think that question sometimes has helped me near the end, but also too, when they say, then I'm kind of left with an unknown, okay, well, of course, then I respond there. But there's my question, where sometimes it hasn't gone well.
Right.
And sometimes it's been really good. And I had a 4th interview with this company, and I started with them before Thanksgiving, and it's on hold for another month and a half.
Right.
But like with that one, I was able to really hear again a kind of a pain point. So I was able to come back with like a little document portfolio on that pain point and what I would do to counteract that. But anyway, so there's my learning and failing.
No,
So,
I like that, Jared. And that is a really good question to ask. You will find and I've used that question a lot before too. And you will find that some companies either are like, no, it's our policy, we don't comment. So don't
yes.
make me uncomfortable, right? Or to your point, they're early in the process. So instead of asking it that way, think about what's a different way that I could ask it, that I could still get the information, or I could still get enough of a clue to do a good follow-up or a rebuttal, right? So instead of saying, do you have any concerns about me as a candidate, right? You could say, what skills or experience do you feel we haven't talked about? Or what skills or experience do you still have questions on? Right? Because then you're not putting the no bad dog onus on them, right? Because you're asking them in the original structure of the question to critique you. And we don't want to critique you. This is why performance reviews take so long, rarely happen, don't happen in the right way, right? Because as humans, we just don't like that, right? So what's a different way to ask that question that you would still get that opportunity and you still get that information? So maybe I'd challenge you to ponder that a little bit and think about how to ask that, but differently, especially in your industry.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Do we need to stretch? Have a small break? You're ready to go into the next part. Oh, and Jared, you do need to jump. That's right. Good luck.
Yeah, thank you for your time. Appreciate you.
Yeah. Good luck.
Uh,
All righty. Okay, here we go. Going back. Okay, so again, theory and practice. What works, what hasn't, how you need to pivot. Okay. All right, selling yourself. This was our conversation last Monday. Please keep in mind, especially for any women on the call, it's not bragging if it's true, right? We tend to be taught to minimize ourselves so that we don't seem like we're full of ourselves. You're not full of yourself if it's truth, okay? And if you tell your own story, you will be interesting. So that's what we're looking for. And this goes back to Oliver's comment at the very beginning, how he tailored his 30-second pitch to tell a little bit more of his own story and to attempt to be, because often we may not be, right, interesting. So what goes into that, right? So your 30-second pitch or your resume summary which we shouldn't always leave blank. And we used mine as a good example of what not to do. Mine was wordy, it was repetitive, and it had no impact statements. So let's walk through that, right? So you want to quantify your impact. Your 30-second elevator pitch, your summary is a great way for you to quantify the impact, right? So one of our people had saved over $1 billion. I've been able to enhance social media engagement by 400% over just a quarter, right? So think about how do you quantify your impact? What are those numbers? And Roger, we spent some time talking about your experience as well in customer service and in solving problems, right? So what's the volume? What's the impact that you make? Put a number to it because we attach to numbers. Okay? Make it sound like you, not a sound bite. We had fun with this, right? Mine sounded like a really wordy sound bite. We teased Mike a little bit about how his sounded really great, but it was like a automaton was saying it, right? Dax, you have your hand up.
I do. Sorry, it took me a second to remember how to do that.
That's
Because
okay.
so this goes back to the first thing.
Mhm.
One thing, one trouble that I run into with the quantifying my impact is different size organizations and different industries, whatever, have different things that matter to them regarding marketing and what they're measuring. And it's hard to sometimes get across like some things I've done where companies that I've worked for where we were starting from zero with like no marketing. And so we achieved the exact goals that we were trying to achieve, but these other companies are seeing that and they're like, well, that's nothing to us
Mhm.
because we've been in business for 25 years. We don't remember what it was like at the beginning to start from zero. And so it's really hard because sometimes those things, and I can see it like to them,
Mhm.
like just on paper, like if we're not actually having a discussion about it and giving the context, it's really hard for them to see that that actually was a huge achievement and not, you know,
Mhm.
even if it's not the same as in where what they're trying to do.
Right. So are we talking specifically about saying generated like $100,000 worth of new revenue based on marketing? Help me
Yeah,
ground to where you are. Is it something
yeah,
like
yeah.
that?
I mean, that's like revenue. I always come back to revenue, like, because that's often the thing that catch people, but there are other measures too that I've
Right.
used that are the same thing, like, um, you know, engagement on stuff or whatever. So,
So in that situation, like I threw out the stat about increasing social media engagement by 400%, right? So I used a percent. Do you want to know what that meant in terms of actual numbers? I got 100 more people to engage on the platform, right? So when you have a smaller actual number, sometimes you're able to make it more relevant and to get people to ask questions about how you did that by using the percentage instead of the number. Would that be helpful in your situation, Dax?
it is, yeah. And it's the challenge is honestly like always just getting into the conversation to actually have that conversation
Yes.
and figuring out how to quantify things on my resume that won't just be like glossed over by certain companies because it's not within their realm. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
And that's another thing that we can go back and do. And quite frankly, I hate this part of applying for a job. But if I look at the job description and I can identify what really matters to them, like what are the core deliverables, or I've had that recruiting conversation, then I can look at, okay, what stats do I have that target that specifically? And then I put those as bullet points in my career highlights. or I may even throw it into my summary statement. But it does take that customization and that extra lift, which sometimes, quite frankly, we just don't have energy for. Because looking for a job, preparing for interviews, it's a lot of work, right? Oliver, you had your hand up as well.
Just an idea, and you already got it.
Okay, all right. Okay, so on the make it sound like you, not a sound bite. I work with women coming out of abusive situations or coming back into the workforce after having been in jail. And when we craft their 30-second pitches or their summary statements, it's fascinating to me how they talk in terms of, well, I don't have much to offer. Well, all I did was just, and it takes a little bit of work to dig down in to their actual experience, their work experience, their life experience. And as they're talking to me, I can pull out a minimum of 10 amazing things that they've done that would have relevance to me as a hiring manager, how they navigated a tough situation, how they behaved in a really critical conversation, how they grew from where they were to where they are now, and what they want to do with their lives. But we don't often think about that if we're the ones creating our 30-second pitch or our 30-second or our resume summary, right? So that's where I think it's another critical touch point to have someone either listen to and look for key things that you may gloss over, or to have someone remind you about your awesomeness and what you've done before and how you've built things, right? One time with my husband, he was like, I just don't have this leadership principle that Amazon is looking for. And I'm like, you're right, you don't, right? But what you do have is your ability to build bridges between warring departments, between someone who does not want to follow this OSHA regulation for all of these reasons. You're able to craft that bridge. You're able to build that connection. You're able to do this, which covers all these other leadership principles. And here's how you ask for help in developing the other one, right? So if you give your 30-second pitch, or if you're developing it, please, please, please bounce it off someone who loves you. And if they make faces as you're delivering your pitch, you know you have some room for improvement, and they can point out where and how. Okay. So do not do this in a vacuum. You won't do it right, period. Okay. Add humor and interest. There was one person who was obsessive about playing piano to the point where on days where she could, she played 8 hours a day. That's a human interest part that we can add into our 30-second pitches to catch people's attention, right? You want to be memorable. You want them to focus on you and on your interests so that you stand out. Make them want to know more. So Dax, with your experience, right? You've done the full gamut. You've created from nothing, and you've also gone in and fixed, broken, right? Throw out a stat or throw out a little sound bite that makes me want to know more. Where I'm like, whoa, that's interesting. Tell me more about that time. What did you do? How did you accomplish it? Okay, and then have a takeaway, literally. It can be a business card. It can be your marketing plan, which Steve, I think you posted that or added that into your summaries from last week, right? Or you can have, if you do 3D hobby printing, you can have a little coin with your name and phone number on it. Have a takeaway something that they will remember you by, or add something that helps them remember your name. Someone went up to me one time and they said, "Hey, I'd like to introduce myself to you." And I said, "I'm probably not going to remember your name because my brain just isn't like that." And they said, "Well, you know the pianist, Billy?" And I'm like, "Yeah, Billy Joel." And they're like, "Okay, that's my first name." And then, you know, Winona and Naomi? And I'm like, "Oh, Judd." And he's like, "Yeah, my name is Joel Judd, JJ." I have never forgotten that man's name, right? Because it was a takeaway from our conversation. All right, again, theory and practice. Let's stop and go back to the Hollywood squares real quick. Questions? How do I's? Anything like that?
I'll throw in one here. Roger, why don't you throw in the question you got asked at the very end of your interview last week that caught you off guard?
It was at the very end, one of the managers that was actually doing the interview um, came up and said, "Is there anything you could tell me that may you want to tell me that may surprise me?" And that kind of caught me off guard what they were asking. Yeah. And then I talked to Steve about it, and we Googled it, and came back, and it was basically um, actually we bounced it off AI, and AI came back and said, uh, "Tell me something more about your career that may be more interesting to help me uh, consider you for the job."
Mhm. Yeah. So Roger, I will say last week when you shared some of your experience, I was very surprised at your emphasis on how you collaborate with your teams. Because to me, you seem like a very introverted, job task focused person. So I wouldn't naturally assume that you were extroverted in how you focused on helping the entire team succeed.
What came to my mind in the interview
Mhm.
was, if we go ahead and perform a background check on you, what is there anything out there that may surprise us?
Mhm.
That was what was coming to my mind, you know, instead of, you know, what I found out through AI, which actually Steve provided me, was,
Right.
is there anything in your career that may be more interesting that help
Mhm.
you, stand out more?
Right. So
If they
you,
would have reworded the question a little differently, I probably would have understood more what they were asking.
Mhm. And so, oh, Roger, I love how you bring that up. Okay, how many of you have been in a situation where they ask you a question and you're just like, right? All of us, like, woo, all of our hands, right? And we always think that we have to just operate from what they've given us. What's the reality? Like Roger, all of us, right? Jason's shaking his head. There's absolutely nothing wrong with us coming back and saying, "That's a really interesting question. Tell me more. Are you looking for something from my personal life, or are you looking for something from my career?" Right? To create and buy yourself that leeway so that your brain can catch up after your heart stops having a heart attack, right? And that's going to require practice. That's something that you need. Like if that does not come naturally to me, I actually have to practice that one in the mirror before an interview where I can say, "That's a really interesting question. Tell me more." Okay. Roger, do you think that would have helped you or no?
Yeah, I kind of was more puzzled,
Mhm.
and I kind of looked at them like, what are you asking? And I should have asked, can you explain that in a different way? But I didn't.
Yeah.
So,
But I mean, let's face it, guys, interviews are high pressure situations where we epically want to succeed. And when something comes at us out of the blue, we freeze, right? So when you feel that freeze response coming, or that flight, or whatever one of the many ones, right? When you feel that coming, have a question ready that buys you time. You can even say something like, can you ask me that question again? As simple as that, right? Something that buys you a little bit of time and leeway so that you can catch up. Okay. So yeah, Carrie.
Hopefully thank you for telling me, Steve, I was kind of spotty. I'm hoping my voice isn't what you hear. I think for me, one of the things I've done when I've been in those situations is I state it and say, well, this is what I'm hearing. Is that what you're asking? Like rephrase it, like this is what I'm hearing you asking me. Is that correct? Or something along that line. So, because sometimes that's bought me some time. Because it's like deer in the headlight phrase game, So, so anyway, but that was just one of the things.
Yeah.
Question.
That's another great way to phrase it, Carrie. Thank you for that. All right. We are at the end of our prepared time. Do you guys want to delve into theory, talk about something else, or go into negotiating your worth? Steve, how do we want to use the time?
Let them pick.
Okay.
I'd be really interested in the negotiating your worth aspect of this before we finish the series. I'm very curious about that.
Okay. Do we have agreements? Raised hands? Woot, woot. Yes, let's do that. Okay. All right. So this presentation, and Steve, I took it from exactly what Dee and I did back in 2023, right? So Dee Shorten was a job team member with one of my groups. And Jason, you may remember her. She had that cute British accent, right? Back in 2023. And she was a master negotiator from a sales background on how to negotiate your worth. And we were talking about the importance of knowing yourself and what matters and how that translates into negotiating your worth, negotiating your salary. Okay. So again, I have some slides as background, and let's go ahead and share those so that I stay on track because sometimes I don't. Okay. So negotiation, bringing your non-negotiables and your accelerators of the offer, right? Because we often think, well, that's a horrible base salary, right? But what other things are coming into play? And I love this quote by Chris Voss, who says that negotiation is not an act of battle, but a process of discovery. The goal is to uncover as much information as possible, right? And that's true for the company hiring you, right? Because what do they always want to know? What was your last salary? Right? That gives them a data point, doesn't really give them information. And so we'll walk through all the different bits and pieces of information that go into that negotiation. And you guys may have more to add. So please, as we're going through this, if there's something that you have used that is not here, call that out so that we can all learn together. Okay. So negotiating your salary, your interview EQ, your personal non-negotiables, your accelerators, that's your baseline, right? That's your interview where you're saying, do I even want this job? Do I like this culture? Can I work for this manager? Are they going to behave in a way that enables me to create the impact that I have to have in order to be successful? Or to Dax's point, can I stand this long enough until I find my next job? Dax, you brought that up in one of our first conversations, and that's always stuck with me, right? Because sometimes we just need a job and we need it for the now, but it doesn't have to be for the forever, right? And then we talk about living wage.
I will quickly point out
Yeah.
that when I brought that up, I can't remember if I mentioned this, but the best job I've ever had was one that I took with that in mind, that I thought it was just going to be temporary, and it ended up being the best company I've ever worked for and the best. So sometimes that plays in your favor,
That
just to
does.
give everybody encouragement.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. So we have your offer, right? Usually the offer includes your wage, location, your travel. You need to know your living non-negotiables. What is the absolute living wage that you have to have? And a lot of people don't think about this. They may think, oh, they're going to move me to Seattle and I'm going to make 10,000 more than I'm currently making, and I'll be making 95,000 a year. Cool. Yes. Well, 95.
Antoinette, is this a personal story?
No, thank heavens. Right. But we see it happen time and time again where you have to do that sanity check and say, you buy yourself time, right? Like Carrie's ideas and Roger's ideas. You give yourself, thank you very much for your offer. I need to look over that and truly understand if this meets my non-negotiables. It's perfectly okay to say that. And if they're like, well, can you get back to me at the end of the day? Probably not. It's going to take me about 24 hours at least to look through this, right? So does it give you a living wage? Are you going to be in a location that you can stand? I drove Dawn to the airport this morning in Utah. That's easy peasy-ish, right? Here with the carpool lane, it was an hour and 15 minutes up and about an hour and 15 back. On if I'd just been driving myself to the airport, it would have been an hour and a half to 2 hour drive because of traffic, right? So all of these things go into your living non-negotiables. And then you're also looking at benefits. Many companies will say, we have a full benefit package. You sign on the dotted line, and then you find out that benefits are going to cost you $1,000 a month. Those are perfectly legitimate questions to ask before you sign for your salary. So, what are the benefits? Who are your providers? What is the base cost? What is the cheapest cost? What is the most expensive program? Do you take that out on a monthly basis, bi-weekly basis, right? How is that funded? And then we talk about equity. So am I going to be getting stock as my higher on bonus, or is stock part of my bonus calculation? I'm leaving the opportunity to have 300 shares of the company vest in the next 6 months. That translates into $60,000. What is my sign-on bonus to cover that gap? Title, right? I had someone who said, well, my title is a virtual assistant. And I said, but what are you going to really be doing? And what do you want to be doing in 5 years? And the conversation was, well, I'm going to be a project manager, and that's what I want to be doing because I'm working on my certification. Great. Then your title, part of that negotiation of negotiating your salary, is to have project manager as your title, or at a bare minimum, project coordinator. with the understanding that you'll look at changing that over time, right? For those of you who are in sales or are in leadership or are in a highly production motivated environment, what are the commissions and the bonuses that come with your salary? And is it on a monthly, quarterly, or annual basis? And what are the stipulations behind that? Because they may say, oh, you have the opportunity to earn 60% of your salary as a bonus. That's great. Tell me about the goal setting mechanism. Tell me about how that bonus is calculated. Is that bonus solely calculated on my delivering on my goals, or is part of that bonus or even the triggering of the bonus dependent upon how the company does? And what's been the company's success rate at hitting their targets so that bonus pool is unlocked to begin with, right? These are all critical questions that you should not be shy about asking because it goes into your living non-negotiable wage and how you view the worth that you're bringing to the table and how that company is viewing the worth that you're delivering. Okay, so those are all money type things. What about work hours, location, PTO, and holidays? So and again, just a personal example, when I went remote back in 2016, location was, okay, yeah, you can move to Washington. We'll keep you on here with a company in Utah, but you need to come into Utah for 1 week a month. Okay. And then my husband's job changed where he needed to be in California for 2 weeks a month. And we still had a kiddo at home. And so on the week that I was in Utah, the negotiation with his company was that he worked from home that week. And then he was in California and then he was in another location for that 4th week a month, right? So that location and that flexibility matters. When he moved over to this other part of Amazon, location was like live wherever as long as you can get to this location 3 times a week. Well, then Andy Jassy changed it at the beginning of this year to 5 days a week. So now my husband commutes into Seattle 1 hour, 15 minutes in the morning, and it takes him 2 hours to get home at night, and he rides the bus. So location matters, work hours matter to your overall mental health and the success of your family, right? And then PTO and holidays. Some of us who've worked at companies for a while, we get really used to having those 3 to 4 weeks of PTO plus 2 weeks of sick leave plus, right? And then we go to a new company and we're like, what do you mean I only get 2 weeks? Right? So these are all things that can be negotiated. What else have you seen as something that can be negotiated as part of your salary, or things that you have, or even things that you wish were part of that salary?
Terry.
Well, I know just for me, they do have those bonuses the annual bonuses and everything. And then you can get 15% is what they have for your pay, for example. But how often do you actually get that 15%? And, that's, I think, working with the company for, that shall be unnamed, for that 8 years. I've never, even getting a spot, I never, five rating, I never got that 15%. So, if they're going to pitch something, that you're going to kind of put into your budget, I think that was one of the things that my takeaways from working in that environment is that, yeah, how consistently do you get that, even if you're doing it phenomenal? So, so that was one of the things I'm going to ask this go around.
I love that you brought that up, Carrie. And Oliver, just a quick second, because I want to add on to what Carrie said. For me, bonuses don't matter. That's not in my genetic makeup, right? It's not a motivator. It's not Like what matters to me is my base salary. Bonuses are nice, whatevs, right? And I worked for a chief revenue officer who did not understand. He could not compute how a bonus wasn't motivating for me until the day that I said, thank you for the offer of a raise 6 years too late. And I'm walking away from $10,000 worth of bonus because I'm done. Right. And that just blew his mind. Like, how could I even do that? And it's because it goes back to knowing yourself, right? Are you motivated by the competitiveness of a bonus? Great. Make sure that you can achieve that, to Carrie's point, right? Or make sure that it's structured in a way that is going to bring you that satisfaction, right? Okay, Steve, go ahead.
I just want to say also, I've been burned by people telling me things and it's not in the offer letter or it's not in writing. And my word as our bond is didn't serve me very well. And I just think that if it's not in writing, I just want to assume that the person who made me that offer died the next day and nobody knows what we had a conversation about. It needs to be in writing. And I also believe contractual wise, if I'm having a conversation with somebody via email and they email back and forth, it's contractual. If they say yes. I'm sorry. I'm a lawyer in my head.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, that's a really good point, Steve. And Dee and I had some funny and not funny conversations where we'll go you one further, right? Not only make sure that it's in writing or an email, but make sure, like 1000% sure, that it's in your HR file. Because my last offer letter was not.
Ouch.
And my boss had to say, hey, do you have a copy of that offer letter? And I said, well, isn't it in my HR file? Oh, no. So we'd been playing willy-nilly with my pay for 2 years at that point, and I didn't know it because I didn't make sure that it wasn't in my file or that it was in my file. Okay.
One more thing before Oliver goes. I'm salary motivated as well. And I think if we don't get the highest amount of salary up front, every year after that, it's just going to be a small increment, and that's what it's going to be. I do like bonuses, those kind of things. In lieu of salary, if the company can't budge on anything, this is my take home, and that is to as I'm looking through an offer letter, I want to have an aha moment. It's actually planned, but that says, oh, geez, Antoinette, the only one thing I don't see here on the offer letter is the signing bonus. How much is a signing bonus? How much is that? I'm assumptive that it's there. I think it has to be assumptive asked. And I expect that Antoinette or whoever I'm dealing with will say something to the effect of how much were you expecting to be? And I have to be very quick on my feet and have it written down. Antoinette, most companies are offering anywhere between 10 and 15% of my annual income, but I know you will be fair. And it's just scripted right into my thing there. There's two choices. There isn't one. But they have money. They have money. If they're going to relocate me, they have money in other spots. And if I can't get them to budge on that, it is a one-time feature. And I'll take it if I can. And I think we should all ask. I think we're all eligible. We should, but if we don't ask, pretty sure you don't get.
And
Okay.
yes, to Brad's question, yes, signing bonuses are a thing right now, sometimes dependent upon the industry. Oliver, your question.
No, just a couple of comments of things that have come up in my past that I wish I had talked about. One was vacation weeks, how much that actually is. And the other is benefits delay, like a delay in being eligible for benefits when I came on, that I didn't know about before I took a job.
Yep. Yeah, some companies will say, oh, by the way, your benefits don't start for 90 days. And to which I say, oh, that's interesting. So you don't want me to actually start my job for 90 days? Because that's just a company policy. Your benefits can start on day one. And that conversation is, help me understand how we ensure that those benefits start for my family on day one. Or in addition to my sign-on bonus, are you going to pay for my COBRA coverage for those 3 months for me and my family? Right? Because, go ahead, Steve.
Oh, and I'm just going to say, some of the clients on the SRUs, those stock options that are not going to mature, and they want you now, and they don't want to wait.
Right.
That's another reason why that signing bonus can help compensate that over time to get you started and not miss out on something that's there at the end of the rainbow, so to speak, that you will get if you
Right.
stay on.
Yeah. Okay, so I love these questions. I'm going to go back and share a slide that Dee created because she was marvelous with words. And these are kind of how you have those conversations, right? Because you're like, what if they don't give me the job? That's a legitimate fear, right? But going back to what that quote said, we're seeking information. They're seeking to find out how cheap they can get you, and you're seeking to find out if they're going to pay you what you're worth, right? So here's an opening starter that Dee has used before. Thank you for the time we've spent together so far and for the offer. I'm looking forward to further discussing our potential partnership. Yes, they threw a salary number at you. That's not the end of the conversation, right? So, and again, we always have a lot of questions on, well, how do I know my worth? Well, you can use salary.com, you can use Glassdoor. Lee Hecht Harrison have some tools for calculating average salaries in certain markets.
I mostly use the salary.com with the zip code. I think that makes
Okay.
the most sense.
All right. So these are your additional conversation starters. You're seeking additional information, right? Given the market value for the role we have discussed, my extensive experience in this field, including A, B, C, D, remind them how incredible you are, right? I'm looking for a base salary closer to blah. My neighbor did this, and she just actually left the job that she got 2 years ago to go to another job. But with the job that she just left, right? They gave her her offer, which was more than what she was making at her current company, and it included bonuses and whatnot. And she's like, but I know it's going to be tough. I'm going to be working 15+ hour days on average. And so she basically said, I'm looking for a base salary closer to X. And that X was 60,000 more than what they offered her. They did not blink. And they said, okay, and sent her a revised offer letter. So
I just posted in the chat one of the jobs I found this morning. I'm probably going to apply for it. One of the things that they had in here was personal learning and development of 2,000 per year. That's another thing you may want to be asking.
yeah. And if that matters to you and it's easy to use, right? Do you have to wait a year to use it? Can you use it from day one? Does your manager have to approve? Those are all great questions that you can say. Tell me more about this learning and development fund, right? How long has that been in place? How do people normally use it? Can I use it from day one? Do I need manager approval, right? Those questions that you should be asking in order to get what matters to you, right?
And it also put in here too that they're looking to pay for your travels too and upgrades and stuff like that. So there's a lot of benefits there.
That sounds like a great company to explore, Roger. Here's another one, right? If the location isn't that great, or if they say, oh, by the way, you have to be in Chicago at a desk 5 days a week, right? I notice that the offer indicates the work will be performed at an office. This is not what we had discussed through the interview process. If this is an error, let's revise the offer to Steve's point. Get the right stuff in writing to reflect the location as work from home or work from home part-time, right? And then if the work location is fixed, I will need a revised offer letter, including a monthly guaranteed stipend of blah to cover the additional direct cost of commute, as well as relocation closer to the office. Dax, you have your hand raised.
Yes, but I need to take this call, so.
Okay, we will come back to you. Okay. And here's another one, right? Upon review of the benefits package, it appears that health insurance coverage, we already talked about this one, is not provided for the first 90 days. Can this be waived? Or will you add a sign-on bonus payable on the first paycheck to cover the 3 months of COBRA, right? Know your numbers, right? How much is that family COBRA coverage going to cost? And what is the total, right? Because some companies are like, well, you're hired on the 15th, but we don't start our benefits until the 1st of every month. And then you can say, well, would you prefer that I start on the 1st then? Because that health insurance benefits coverage matters to me. And this is the value of COBRA for that time frame, right? Okay, so those are some conversation starters. What other questions do you guys have, or what have you run up against before?
I think that sometimes early in the game, and I've seen this be a common challenge for some of my clients, and that is that they want to get into negotiations on the first screening call. And our goal is to get past the screener, have them love us and send them to the hiring manager, the team, whatever that is. I also don't believe that HR and the recruiter, they give advice, but I don't believe they control a budget. And so we, I don't want to get into the nitty gritty and ask all these questions. I just want them to want me. And then the negotiation starts once they make me an offer. That's my opinion. And I just seen a lot of people get into this negotiation and feel like they want to tell their worth. And they haven't really come to the party full time yet for there. And then I also believe that we should always negotiate, even if the offer's more than we've ever had.
Mhm.
And two ways to do that might be a simple one. If you're happy with everything, just ask how much more room is in the figure. And a few people have played that card, and it's $5,000, extra $5,000. So,
Harry,
Karen-
go ahead.
Yeah, I know for me, I know it wouldn't necessarily work in this case since I'm obviously working on getting a new job, but like with lateral moves, I know it's always classic for, companies to say it's a lateral move, there's no change in pay, but I always asked anyway, and HR would always say, no, if there's no change. And I said, well, I would really prefer this number. And even if it was like a couple, 5,000 more or whatever, because like to Steve's point, the 1% raise every year or whatever, I mean, you don't get any movement on that in a lot of areas. So, and it did come back, the last time I did it did come back. I had asked for like 5,000 more or whatever. And they actually ended up giving me 10,000. So, and this was after the HR gal told me that it wasn't possible. So, and like to Steve's point and to your point, I think they do have that negotiation power, that they don't hold the purse strings. So, but my problem is that when I get to interview and then, asking them as far as like how much I'm worth, well, what they do is they look at like the zip code, what Steve was talking about, and that I live on the border of Colorado. So Cheyenne, even though we're Wyoming, and in some areas is, not as, it's more cost effective to live there. I live right on the border of Colorado. So our prices are Colorado prices. So I really wish, I try to hone that in on that. I understand that, you're looking at maybe Wyoming wages, but so how do you navigate that? Because I get into that a lot with jobs, or if you have to commute, then I think state income taxes in Colorado. And and the gas, wear and tear on the vehicle, that back and forth. So how do you navigate that negotiation?
Barry, that's a great point. And we actually dealt with that ourselves when we moved up to Washington State. We lived in Washington, and my husband commuted over the border into Oregon. So because he worked in Oregon, he had to pay Oregon state tax, whereas Washington doesn't have state tax, right? So, and that was an interesting experience for us because we hadn't known to ask those questions, right? So with that, it's perfectly okay to have that conversation with them that says, I feel like, or it seems like your offer letter assumes that I should be paid according to my zip code. As you know, I'm going to be working in a different state or a different city. So in addition to the cost of the commute time, there's also the additional cost associated with increased taxes in the location where I'm going to be working. So that's an opening, right? You could also say, I think you're pricing based off of my home zip code versus my place of employment zip code. Let's look at those two and see how different they are. Well, let's have that conversation, right? And let me pull it up real quickly, if I can find it. There's a negotiation framework that is used by Tara Moore and by quite a few and it's based off of Carrie Gallant and her negotiation model. So and Steve, I'll send this PDF to you, okay? But let me pull it up real quick and share it with you. Because again, it goes back to that we're seeking information, right? And we're seeking to gain additional information. And Carrie Gallant uses the triangle model, right? Where you have your opening of, I'd like to talk about salary or whatever with you, but first I'd like to get your point of view. So Carrie, right, that would be a great opening for, I'd like to get your point of view on how that offer was calculated, because it seems a little low based on what I understand of where I'm living and where I'm going to be working, right? Or you could use the phrase, I think we have different perspectives about base salary. I'd like to hear your thinking on this. Tell me how your offer was calculated, right? So you're looking for an opening, and your opening is seeking additional information. You want to discover information about them. You want to ask open questions and be curious. You're not saying, no, bad dog, that's a horrible offer, go back to the table, right? You're saying, help me understand where this offer came from and what goes into this. And are we taking a holistic perspective given all the different factors that are in play, right? And then you want to advocate. You want them to understand where you're coming from. And don't be shy of using I statements when it comes to negotiating your worth or your salary, right? And you want to clarify your views without minimizing theirs. So we wouldn't say things like, well, have you had anyone take that offer? Because it seems really low. We don't want to make them mad, right? And you can look for that common ground where you could say, I love that. I love your benefits package. You clearly understand how important it is for a family to be able to cover their medical expenses. And I wanted to thank you. That's really culturally intelligent of your organization, and I'm grateful. Where I think we are maybe not aligned is on this part of the salary. Can we explore those differences together? I want to better understand where you're coming from and make sure that we're using the same data points to look at the same picture. And then you're looking for your problem solving. How do we brainstorm and build solutions together? You're not looking for them to just capitulate, right? Just roll over and give you what you want, but you want to say what's in my best interest, what's in your best interest, and how do we get there? Is there room to get there, right? I had one company one time tell me that my salary, okay, this was years ago, but still, my salary of 45,000 as an executive assistant to a director and their teams was at the absolute top of the scale. But they didn't realize that as the executive assistant to a director, I would be involved in the leadership process and would have purview to all the salaries. So what did I quickly discover? That salary they offered me was definitely not at the top of the scale, right? So you want to make sure that you're grounding to what's true rather than what they've been told to tell you in order to get you in the door and fill the role, okay? And then you have agreement and commitment, right? And that's that last part of we're still listening to each other. This is what matters to me. This is what matters to you. And where are we going to come together? Okay. So as I said, Steve, I'll send this framework to you so that you can share it out with the team. But Carrie, does that give you a few more ammunition pieces to go into that with?
Yeah, that's great. I wish I would have had that before. That's like phenomenal. Thank you.
It's like all the things that I'm learning now that I wish I'd known.
Oh, yeah, I was like, oh, good. For my next one, I'll be better.
Okay. Did Dax come off his call, Steve, or is he still? Because I know he had
I can't, it looks like he's off screen. I don't
Okay.
know if he's off. I also think that as a hiring manager and those who've been part of this process, do you give the most amount of money you have to give in that, or do you save some money available for negotiations? I think you do, and you try to make a fair offer, but also you have to leave some room so if somebody does counter offer, you have some room. So I think it's there. Another technique that I was taught, similar to what your friend you alluded to, Antoinette, and that was to give a very specific number. Something of fact of I'm very interested in coming on board. And I wondered if we could come closer to, and it was taught by somebody and that said come with a very specific number, so if it was it ends in 697, 115, 697. Maybe they offer you 105 and you put a little bit out there. Wonder if we could come closer. And I have had many people think that's weird. It bothers them. They either meet halfway, they round it down to the nearest one or round it up, or, they're just really transparent that they can't. But I think I think we need to know what the market is. Like you said, Antoinette, we need to know our value and we need to know, well, ask for the things we'd like to have, because if we don't ask, we don't get. That's just how I feel. And I think it's not an ultimatum. It's just I just wondered if we come closer on this. And I have the and/or theory. And theory is that I want this and this and this, or everything was great. I'll see what will negotiate, whether it's PTO or whatever. And
It's also an opportunity as well, because I think quite a few of us have come up against offers where you're like, wow, is that it? Right? And it's an opportunity to seek information around what value does the company or the leadership place in the particular role? Have they seen returns from the role? And so that could be one of your opening conversations, right, Carrie? It could be, thank you for the offer letter. I love the focus on the benefits. Help me better understand the value that the company or the leadership team places on this role that you're asking me to fill? What do they expect, and do they see it as a critical part of their organization? Right. And sometimes the answer is, well, it's just a role that we have to fill, right? Then that's going to tell you how they base their pricing, right? But for Oliver in your situation, and Roger, especially in yours, where you're dealing with solving problems and customer satisfaction and highly technical things, and for those in marketing roles, basically everyone, right? You understand the critical role that your job plays and how it impacts the bottom line. And if you don't have a handle on that, I would challenge you to spend time thinking about that. If I don't do my job and I don't do it well, what happens? And what's the impact? And if you can quantify that, that gives you a better, I would say, a better emotional understanding of your value as you come into the negotiations. Because if I have a better understanding of my true worth, then I'm going to be able to advocate for it in a way that's specific, quantifiable, and negotiable. Right? So I'm not just going to come in and say, oh, that seems a little low. I'm going to come in and say, like to Steve's point, I was hoping that the base offer salary would be closer to 120,000. Help me understand where you're coming from and what additional benefits may not be spelled out in this offer letter. And then to Steve's point, you invite them to put those additional benefits that they may throw out at you in that offer letter so that you can better understand it, right? Because if you're going to give me a car stipend, you're going to pay for my gas, you're going to pay for my internet, and you're going to pay for my breakfast and lunch every day, I might take that over $10,000 on my base salary. But again, that needs to be in writing, or the next manager who comes in is going to say, why are we doing this? That's not okay, right? Here's where I can save some money, right? And make my particular bottom line go up. So. Okay, any other questions? Again, that's a lot to throw at you guys today. We covered 4 massively heavy topics.
This is going to change topics a little bit, but if it's okay if I ask this question.
Yeah.
I just got a screening email, and most of the questions are really easy to answer, but one of them is, what is currently not meeting your needs with your current employer? I mean, I don't want to badmouth my current employer. I've enjoyed working there, and I don't necessarily want to admit up front that I'm being laid off this summer.
So you could, Brad, you could negotiate kind of the middle ground, and you could say something to the effect of, I don't feel like my development or where I want to progress in my career is an achievable focus, given where the company is and where my goals are right now. I'm hoping to find an organization that values ongoing development and career growth. You're not
Okay.
squishy, right? Because that's the truth. Or you could say something to the effect of, I've actually really enjoyed my time with my company, and I'm looking for a organization that reflects some of the great things I've enjoyed about my company, which are A, B, C, D, E. But you make sure that your A, B, C, D, E are already kind of reflected in the company you're applying for, right?
Okay.
You don't want them to exclude themselves from it. What about some ideas from the rest of the group? I mean, you
He can
all,
also
go ahead, Roger.
say that he's looking for more of a secure, stable environment.
Right? So you
That's true.
could add that in, right?
Okay.
I would take a look at the statistics on the company before you do that, right? If you were to put that into something that you're sending to Amazon, that's not going to resonate with them because they have one of the highest turnovers in the country, right? When it comes to headcount. But that's definitely another aspect. Or Brad, think about what really matters to you, right? What are your non-negotiables? To Roger's point, I'm looking for a more stable environment, or I'm looking for a company that values my growth and development, or I'm looking for an opportunity to be part of a winning team that consistently achieves its goals, right? Whatever it is that motivates you and that makes you feel alive, you can put that in.
Okay.
Even if your current company meets that, you could say, I'm looking for a company that challenges me to, or that gives me an opportunity to, right? Oliver, you had a comment.
Yeah, actually, you're doing a really good job of mentioning things that come to my mind. The idea of working in an environment where teams can work together rather than against each other is something that I've encountered that was really important to me as I'm doing my job search now.
And Brad, I
Okay.
don't know if you've had this experience too, but I think I was at least 15 years, no, I was almost 20 years into my career because I'd stayed for 15 years at one organization. And I went to a new organization and I was like, holy that is so much more efficient and so much better than what I've been doing for 15 years, right? So you could say that you're looking for an opportunity to learn from different cultures, that you feel like you've mastered the rhythms of this existing business and you're looking to be challenged in a different way. You're looking to grow your understanding of how successful companies conduct business. If that's something that
Okay.
you find cool. Like I
Those,
found it really cool.
those are all great suggestions. Thank you, everybody.
Welcome. Like this is what I love about Job Team, you guys, and this is why I've stayed in touch with Steve for, gosh, Steve, what, like over 10 years at this point, right? That you have this collective brain trust and you can help each other navigate some of these wonky, weird situations. Like you're always going to have someone who comes up with a, hey, I've never encountered this before. And then 2 weeks later, you're going to encounter it. But you've had that conversation in Job Team, and now you have the tools that you need to succeed. Steve, you're on mute.
You can't read my lips either.
Nope.
So, I just want to have us all show a huge, huge round of applause for Antoinette taking the time and putting this all together and donating her time. I mean, and I hope if she's going to re-enter the job search, that she's still here as just one of you. So she is one of you. So big round of applause.
Thank you.
And I think Van Gogh said it best. Knowledge is not a must. We must apply. We must do that. I love that slide she had, and there was a lot here. And as we're doing this job search, there's a lot of things that come up and go like, like what do I want to really do next? What's a good fit for me? What wasn't a good fit for me? And even if you're dealing with that, like I know what I don't want to do, that's a great place to start. So Antoinette, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I just it's been a great mini series. Thank you. And I'm going to end the recording. Any last words, Antoinette?
Nope. I will send that information over to you so you can share it with the team. And guys, thank you so much. Please reach out on LinkedIn, connect with me under Antoinette Cerrone Martin, and I'd be happy to continue any conversations or any concerns that you have. This is a great team, and I've loved the conversations. I've learned so much, so thank you.
Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
Thank you.